Hey guys, RW here, beefing up my XR10 axle. I'm going to show you how I do it. That's the lump, okay? We're going to go take a look at this over here, away from the cat, away from everything, in the good light. I'll set up the tripod, and I'll show you what I take apart and what I replace. Okay, the thing that you need to separate and rebuild on this, we can look at the lower end and all that, but that's not as critical is getting this upper section here that has the gears in it to separate. There's only a few screws holding that. One of them is this servo mount acts as a brace. Okay, so you have to take it loose. And what I do is when I'm doing this is I orient all my screws. So if I know this came out of here, I'll put that there, and then this screw here, and this screw, and so on, so I don't get screwed up. Let's get this thing out of the way. Okay, I'll tighten that back down so it doesn't flop around and get in my way. These screws are special. I always touch these to a sander and take a ½ mil off them, because these are the screws that will push into your bearing and screw it up if they're too long. So even though these are supposed to be, 10mm screws will work, I find that I have to touch them to a grinder and shorten them just a little bit. This screw does a lot of work. It's a nice long screw. Okay, so there's the screws that hold it from the top. And from the bottom, there's these two screws here. This one's a machine screw. Goes into a little nut that's inside the gear case. Okay. And this other one is a threaded screw. I'll get this out if it'll come. And then this is a self-tapping plastic screw. And I put that beside the threaded screw so I don't get confused later. This way I have no problems with remembering how everything goes together. At this point, the case should come off the top here. Okay, and this is the reason you have to take the shaft out, is the stock axial motor plate has no notch in it. Now you could take a Dremel and cut a notch in that, no problem. So you could pull it out without having to pull your axle stubs up. I'm not sure what the benefit of that would be. While we've got it open, I want to show you, this is a final drive, and this is what drives that big spur or differential gear or whatever they want to call it. And this is just a second here, there's a little something here that shouldn't be there. Here's a piece of a bearing that has fallen apart. Okay, here's another piece of a bearing that has fallen apart, and I'll show you the bearings that fall apart on this. They're these little tiny 8mm across, 2.5 thick, with a 5mm hole in the center bearings. These things fail almost instantly. I have replaced these so many times that I finally decided to go to a big bearing gearbox. Alright, so we're into the swap now. Okay, there's a screw here. It's a flathead self-tapper that holds the bulkhead, okay, which goes over here like this, onto here. Okay, there's this baby here, which has a little E-clip on it. You pop that off if you can, You want to make sure you don't lose it. Okay, got my E-clip off. You take the gear off. You take the pen out, and now the whole thing will come apart. Ah, come on. Get that pen out. Gunner makes little pens for these, which fit a little better. They're awesome. Okay, here's that flanged bearing. Okay, we're not going to be using that motor plate or anything, but we're going to take a good look at this shaft, make sure this shaft isn't too badly worn. Okay, they make titanium shafts for this. Here's the other motor plate and everything. Okay, and the way this goes together is kind of different than the way the other deal goes. You drop your big bearings into here, they give you bearings. Okay, you drop your unflanged 9mm bearings in there. Not going to worry about that right this second. And this is what's going to go through a flanged bearing here. Okay, and then I think you can see that the bulkhead attaches. Now if you look at how close that bearing and that bulkhead is, you're going to see a couple things happen. One is if you use, and you have to reuse the old self-tapper, okay, so if you drop that in there, you will feel that that's perfectly flush. So you actually have to put this and the bulkhead on first before you put your bearing on. Now you'll notice that I had the final drive shaft taken apart like that. I want to get it at least through here first so that I can get my bulkhead in the right place. Okay, here's the bulkhead. You see how that goes? And it's going to go like this, and it's going to be held by that screw. Let's get this thing in the right place. Okay. And so this screw has to go on, this bulkhead has to go on, and this gear all has to go in before you get going. And it's one of the parts that if you start off in the wrong direction, you'll be like, oh shit. So the easiest way is I pop in the two flange bearings. I leave the center one out for now. I get this thing totally lined up. You can see there's going to be a little Traxxas oil light bushing that I need to put in there, and I'm going to put in a brand new one. And I can do that at any time. See, because this moves back and forth, I can get this so I can push the bearing right in there. Okay, so there's enough movement to accomplish that part. And then you can put in your last flanged bearing because you got that all put together. And then the rest of the gearbox goes together very much like an axial gearbox. There's a couple little tricks here when you're putting these. I don't know if the light is showing it really well. I'm trying to get the light to shine on it in such a way that you'll see that these are really, some of these are really quite deep. So when you put the bearing in, you just got to try and push it down with something that's about the same diameter as the bearing to go down these deep slots so it doesn't get cocked sideways and jammed up in there. You want it to seat all the way down. You know, you can poke at it with something like a tool like this if you just go all the way around and all the way around, and you can get them to seat, or you can find something that's exactly the right size. And once they're seated, there you go. And the rest of it's very much just like putting the rest of the gearbox together, which is not that complicated. If you've taken it apart, you know how to put it back together. And then the last part that's a little tiny bit different is the hardware that puts it back together and the little view plate that goes over that. And another thing you'll notice is that the gearbox has a thicker motor plate that's going to throw off where your pinion is. So you're going to have to space your pinion out like 1 millimeter further this way before you reinstall for everything to mesh properly. Okay, so I wanted to show you, how the gearbox looks when it's assembled correctly. And get a good close look at that so you can see how that works, right? You got your final drive, you got your idler, you got the step down, and you got this little transfer gear that's under a lot of load. And this is the time when you can, before you, cover it up with the case and everything, you can put your motor in place and you can check that your pinion is fully engaging with the step down gear. That's important. So you don't have to tighten it up yet. You can't because nothing's in the right place. But you can definitely check height and see whether it should be just a tiny bit higher or whatever, so that you're getting full engagement. You want to make sure your gears are fully engaged. Before I put this together, I want to slather it up with grease as well. Get grease all around everything and start getting it to transfer around by just moving it. Looks like a lot of grease right now, but I will wipe it all down and try and remove as much excess as possible. Right now I just want to slather it out. So that's all nicely slathered up. Get any of this off the sides of the gears that we don't need. I like to get it right on it. Get all that off of there. Okay. Plenty of grease on the gear, on the pinion. Get all that grease off the sides. And it's pretty decent. It's pretty decent. Then we drop the housing on it. that to all engage nicely. So now it's all put together. And the last gear that I had not greased up is this one that engages with the final drive, but I run it around a little bit, spin it, make sure everything's really happy inside there. Before I, even bother screwing it, I do my last little bit of grease so I can clean my hands up, clean the outside of everything. And I like to make sure that I got grease everywhere, even though this is going to be in contact with the pre-greased final drive gear in the lower part. I like to make sure I've got grease all the way around. Light coating the grease there. Alright. And they provide some screws to put this together that you need to use. Okay, get those babies out. Alright. And you guys see 3 long ones. Those are pretty obvious where those should go. Okay, I'm going to put one right through here. Get this case to start holding up. There we go. Okay, so now the case is pretty much going to not fall apart. And you will put the inspection plate on with these little clear washers and put that on after you've got your mesh of your gear all set up with your motor. You could install your motor now if you wanted to and fiddle around with it and get the pinion and all that set up. I do that later. Okay, so that's as much as it actually takes to get that to hold together. And you drop that in here and you get your bulkhead and everything to line up, and this is where you may find that your bulkhead is twisted just a little bit to one side or the other. Make sure you're still got your little like bearing in there. You want that to seat really nice without any force. Should fit down really good. And then you just go about reassembling it. Right? These screws will come in handy later. I'll show you. Okay. So, got the long screw. It holds the servo housing. Get that on. I'll start holding the bulkhead down. Right. Get that retightened. Okay, that's good. We've got my little tiny short screws. Hold all this together. And make sure that they don't go into the bearing race area, bearing housing area, whatever. And then the long one goes in the back. Okay, put that all in. Everything's cinched down there. Okay, now the bulkhead is attached from the top, and there'll be 2 screws left to attach it from the bottom. And this is where I find it gets problematic. So the long screws theoretically will go to the back. And if everything's held down right, it should start engaging into the aluminum and going on up in there. Okay. Last time I had to substitute screws because they weren't quite right. You want that as snug as you can. You don't want to start deforming the plastic. And then there's another little flathead screw. It's a little bit shorter, and that's supposed to go in here. So these worked out okay on this time. On my rear axle it was a little different. I had a little trouble with it. But on the front it works really good. Okay. And that's that. Okay. And then you're going to have 2 long screws that are going to secure your little plastic cover here. After you get everything dialed in and your motor and your pinion and everything are all happy, moving together. Okay, and I'll show how to get the pinion and lash and all that set up in a second. Okay, let me show you something about how you set up your lash. This is a real small pinion. It's a 13-tooth pinion, so there's not a whole lot of room between the screw heads and the aluminum casing inside. So I had to eliminate the little washers that you'd normally use. Okay. This Bainbot motor comes with a flux ring. I had to eliminate that. Okay. Okay, because it won't get close enough. And what you're looking for is, as you see, as you slide the motor this way, it gets far away from the step gear. As you push it in, it engages. And what you can do is, with your shaft in place like this, is you can rotate back and forth and look for how much play. As you come out, you're going to see the gear moving back and forth, and as you come in, you're going to see the gear not moving very much at all against the pinion. When you get it into a happy place that you feel comfortable that would work, you just want a little tiny bit of space. You don't want a lot. You can gently tighten the two screws, and you can check the lash. You can look at it closely and see how much play you're getting. I'm getting just this itty bitty bit of play, just enough to squish grease back and forth in between. Then I turn it and I listen to it. There's a certain noise that proper lash makes. That's the noise it makes. It shouldn't be growling, it shouldn't be going rah, 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 and it shouldn't be dead silent, because when you're doing that, you're under so much pressure that there's no room for lubricant and there's no room for play. So if there's any kind of out around, any kind of wobble, you're going to be beating your bearings up. You gotta have a little tiny bit of slack in between all the parts. So now that's all tightened up the way I like. And the last step for this hot racing thing is you put on your little clear plate. You have screws that have little clear washers. You just drop them right in there and you spin it. Oh no, I dropped the washer. Derp. Big old clumsy fingers. Get in there, you. And those just go and sock down into the aluminum. No big deal. Somewhere I've got a driver for that. Okay. You don't want to go crazy on these babies. This is just a little piece of Lexan. It's pretty strong, but you just snug it so that it stays. And there you have it. The last step, of course, would be to feed your last axle on. Get that where it belongs. Okay, which I'm doing by just wiggling, and I want to make sure that my holes are where I want them. Everything looks like it's lined up right for my spline holes. And you just have to find the slot, and on it goes. And then you just cinch everything back up. You make sure your links work and everything works properly. I've got a cat that is interfering with my video shoot in the biggest way, man. Let me rescue these two little washes before she totally snatches the paper towel. Okay. Alright, I think that pretty much wraps this video up. And you can imagine how to assemble the rest of all this stuff. That's a whole nother thing. But that's basically how you get your lash set up. Everything sounds right, everything feels right, and there you have it. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Me and Venus are going to finish building the crawler over here. She's going to be wherever I am, as you can imagine. Thought I'd finish up by showing you the thing put back together. Everything's back to where it's supposed to be. And I probably need to take this one apart and replace the bearings. If you listen to the front one, I'll spin the motor. You can listen to it. It's really smooth. Nice sound, right? Proper lash, all that. Growly. Not growly. Growly. Not growly. My guess is bearings are starting to go, because that's the noise it makes when that happens. A little preventive maintenance. Change out those bearings. I think I'll be good for another dozen batteries or so.